So first, we can see here that we're in Pivotal Ops Manager. And when you first install PKS, you install this Ops Manager product using the standard fill-in-the-blank OVA installation process. And once you've deployed this OVA, you hit the the IP address for Ops Manager, and you'll be able to see this screen. And you have here on the left where it says vSphere. This is the Bosch Director tile for VMware vSphere. So the first thing, once you've installed Ops Manager, you come in and you configure this tile. And you can see it's a fill-in-the-blank process. And once you've completed the Bosch Director installation, you do the same thing for the PKS and for Harbor. So let's go ahead and look at the fill in the blanks here that we need to do to deploy PKS. In this case, it's already been deployed, and we can come back into our settings here for the tile and make updates as needed. We can see here there's a list of Plan 1, Plan 2, and Plan 3. Now in PKS, when you create a Kubernetes cluster, you create it using one of these plans. And the plan defines things like how many master nodes do I have, how many worker nodes do I have. So we can see that here. This plan name is small. We can define up to 3 master etcd nodes across multiple availability zones. There's a lot of options in here in terms of the capacity that you'd like to provide for the master nodes, persistent disk, and so on. Right now it's only showing one availability zone because that's in vSphere. We have configured one cluster resource pool for PKS, and so it's only going to show one availability zone as being available. But if we had multiple, then we could select multiple availability zones, and that will deploy our master and etcd nodes across the different availability zones. We can define how many worker nodes, and also the size of the worker nodes, and so on. And with this, notice currently in PKS 1.1 there are 3 plan options available. In a future version of PKS, it's planned that will make a lot more quantity of custom plans available in this UI. In the meantime as well, in addition to crafting out these 3 plans that you can make available to your developers, you can also customize. So if I deploy a Kubernetes cluster based off of the small plan, and let's say the small plan in this case has 2 worker nodes, and I'd like to add a 3rd or a 4th or up to 50, I can still deploy this plan based on the small plan and enter a command line flag that will allow me to customize the quantity of worker nodes or other plan variables. Right? So we can see here our PKS configuration. And now I'll go ahead and I'll jump into our PKS command line. And the first thing we do when we jump into the PKS command line is login. So PKS uses the user account and authorization server. And so we have an account for admin already created in our UAA server. And so in this case, I'm going to log in to my PKS API using the admin username and the admin password with my -u and my -p flags. And now I'm logged in successfully. And I can see which clusters that I have created already with my PKS list clusters command. And we can see right now we have one cluster created called my cluster. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new cluster. So first let's do PKS create -cluster. And let's look at the help for this to see what options are available for this command. And we can see here that we can define things like an external host name, number of nodes, the name of the plan. If I wanted to state specifically this is going to be a small plan. Now, in lieu of, you don't actually have to state the name of the plan. You can define one of your plans as a default plan. So if you just type in, PKS create cluster, and then the name of the flag with no or so the name of the cluster. Okay, I'll go ahead and type in PKS create cluster, and we'll define the plan name as small, and then we'll also define our external host name, and I'll just call this, oops, I almost forgot the actual name, so it's PKS create cluster, and then we'll give the name to the cluster. I'll call this test cluster, and I'll define my external host name also as test cluster. And then we'll go ahead and hit enter to create this. Now I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while the cluster is creating, and I will resume once the cluster is created. Okay, we're back, and I'm going to run this PKS list clusters command to see the status of the new cluster I've created here. And we can see now I now have two clusters, my cluster that was already there, and test cluster, the new one I created, now succeeded. So now that we can, let's jump back into our CLI. We can see that we've listed the clusters, and now we can run this PKS command called get credentials. And what this will do is I'm logged in now as a PKS administrator. You saw me log in at the beginning of the video. And we've created a Kubernetes cluster. And so the question now is, how do I get access to the Kubernetes cluster, to access that master API server in the Kubernetes cluster? When I run this PKS get credentials, it's going to go ahead and pull down a cluster admin service account credentials into my local context and apply it to my local kubectl environment here. So I called this test cluster, so we'll just do that. And it's going to fetch my credentials, and now you can see it loaded it down as a kubectl context. So I can actually do this for several clusters if I'd like, and then switch context. And now that I have my Kubernetes cluster credentials, I can go ahead and issue these kubectl commands or API calls. And let's just do kubectl get deployment. Now this isn't going to show anything right now, and we'll fix that in a second. But because we just launched this cluster, and by default, this kubectl command is going to run on the default namespaces. So now if we actually type in the flag all namespaces, we can see all of the system, the Kubernetes system pods or deployments that have been deployed. And we can see, we can get into our Kubernetes cluster now and monitor our pods and deployments. And we can also jump over to the Kubernetes dashboard and make sure I'm still logged in here. And we can see the details of our cluster. There's 4 namespaces that are created by default, and we can see the different roles that are running. We can see that there's this Kubernetes dashboard minimal, where we're actually, the pod we're actually getting this dashboard from. It's running in the kube system namespace, so we can jump over here to change this to our kube system namespace. I'm going to set the namespace to kube system, and now I can go in here, and I can see our deployments just like we just saw in the CLI command. And we have a fully functional Kubernetes cluster. We can extend our CLA and API access to our users to go ahead and start deploying pods. Thank you very much. This concludes the video.